Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome at the Berlinale Talent Campus, 9th edition of this year's Talent Campus at the wonderful Hebbel Theatre, with theme this afternoon, filming war. Filming war, either in documentary film or in fiction film, requires a position of a filmmaker, choosing which way to tell the story, choosing what to show, and also maybe filming and working in life-risking situations. Your moderator of today, who will also introduce you to this year's panel on filming war, is a former producer, film critic, and journalist, but now director of the London Film School, Ben Gibson.
I'll see if my, oh yes, it does work. Good afternoon. First I want to call onto the stage my guests, three extraordinary filmmakers with very extraordinary films. I just want to say before that we're meeting in extraordinary times as well, just in the joyful aftermath of a peaceful conflict in Cairo, and it's something that we can celebrate in its peacefulness, given that there are at the moment 9 wars. I checked this morning. There are 9 more wars running in the world, a war being something where over 1,000 people die a year, according to the statistics. And in 2010, over 50,000 people died in those 9, and they're the official ones. So we're going to talk about positions, taking positions, and the position of these filmmakers. First of all, can I introduce you to Danis Tanovic, Maoz and Janus Metz. So what we want to do is I want to introduce the filmmakers, and then we're going to have some clips, some of which are quite substantial of the film, so you get an idea of the texture and of some turning point scenes in the films. And then we're going to have, hopefully, a broad conversation, and we're going to include you about filming conflict, about taking positions or not taking positions, about how these filmmakers came to the positions that they're in. First of all, Danis Tanovic came to fame in the film industry in 2001, winning the Foreign Language Oscar and the European Film Prize for his film about the Bosnian War, No Man's Land. He had a film this year in Toronto called Circus Columbia, and you're going to find out more about what he's doing now when we start talking about positions, I hope. Samuel Maoz, at 20 in 1992, fought in the IDF, Israel Defense Force tank corps, which was the first week of the Lebanon conflict, which was supposed to last for a few weeks, but lasted for 18 years. And he'd been involved with filmmaking, but came back to it in 2009, around the time of a new conflict, a new war. He made this film Lebanon, which has had an extraordinary impact. The film, actually, I have to say, was rejected by Cannes and even Berlin. I hate to say that in this hall, but it won the Golden Lion in Venice that year, and it's a film which has changed many lives. And I'm sure that lots of people have seen these films, but we're going to remind you of them with clips. Janus Metz won the Critics' Prize this year in Cannes with Armadillo, which is a film where he has quite extraordinary access to a Danish company fighting in Helmand province in the continuing war in Afghanistan. He became known in Denmark for 2 films, Love on Delivery and Ticket to Paradise, before this, which is his first cinema feature, and he's preparing another cinema feature, which I understand is a fiction next time, and we'll get again to that. Some of the themes we want to talk about, you will name for us. I'm interested in the question of whether you can make a new kind of war film, which is something that people who make war films think about incessantly, whether you can deal with the things that come out of the narrative, individual heroism, male supremacy, all kinds of things that come out of the genre of war film. There's a moment in Armadillo where they're watching where those John Wayne films belong now, which is in computer games. They are in fact the dominant genre of anyone who buys a computer game, so it's not as though old-fashioned war movies have finished. They're one of the biggest products of the American entertainment business. But then always from All Quiet on the Western Front, from Shoulder Arms, through the history of cinema, people have tried to make films which are about the confusion and the pointlessness and the individual experience of war in different ways and in different atmospheres and tones. And maybe since the film that we all think about when we think about the modern war film, since Apocalypse Now, independent filmmakers have tried many ways to bear witness in an intimate way, which gives them some control over the film, to the conflicts around them. And I think we have really an extraordinary panel to discuss that. It couldn't possibly have anyone else on it. So I'm very excited about that. Now, I want to start in a way chronologically in order of maybe of the conflicts or of the films being released, and to start with Danis's No Man's Land. I'm not going to say anything more about the film, except to ask you to introduce your clip, if possible, to say something about, well, perhaps I can ask you something about where the story came from you, how you found this extraordinary incident, which is at the center of this film.
Well, before doing No Man's Land, I was in the, first I was a student, then war happened, and I joined the army then. Well, it was not the army at the time, it was some kind of police station where some police officers were defending, and I went there, and there were special forces, and after 1 week I realized I was not as special as they were. So I grabbed the camera basically, and I started filming, and that's how I started doing documentaries. I started filming war, and I spent 2 years filming everything that was happening, and different aspects of war, and these shots were being used in some films, in news. I've been giving them away. They've been used in Hague. I was also a member of a commission for investigation of war crimes at the time. So for years and years, I continued doing documentaries because I thought that life is much better screenplay writer than I could ever be, and I just enjoyed in that. And then, I don't know, it just came naturally. I came back to thinking of my first feature film, and as I was always filming about war, talking about war, it was somehow normal to make movie about my position. Actually, I don't think it's a movie about Bosnian war. I think it would be too pretentious to say. I don't think it's possible to make one movie about one war, any given war. So to answer the short, in the theme of this, I think the only way to film war is to make anti-war films, for me at least. So this is how I would resume this lesson, so we can all go home now. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
And this is how I started working. And then, of course, I thought if I start making, when you're writing first time film, it's not easy to find somebody who's going to produce it, because especially producers, when they hear war story, they go like, oh my God, it's going to cost a fortune. So I tried in a way to use my skills, because I was studying also theater. I kind of made it. It's almost like a theater piece, and I did it because I felt that was the only way to make a movie about.
Because in some ways, it's quite reminiscent of the theater plays that became famous after the trench warfare of the First World War. So Journey's End and The Long, the Short, and the Tall, and those cramped films based in trenches.
Actually, with No Man's Land, it was the opposite thing. First it was a film, and now they're playing it in the theaters.
Is that right?
Yeah. So the opposite process.
That's great.
So that's I wrote the screenplay. I sat down and wrote the screenplay. At that time, I was kind of not having too much money. I remember making 3 copies, and I left it in the 3 production houses in Paris that I thought might be interested in it. And 1 week later, one of them called me for lunch. And when French people invite you for lunch, that means you're going to sign a contract. So if they invite you for a coffee, don't go.
And in a way, because there's a series of films, there's a real rich history of films about the Bosnian War in a short period of time. And this one has a certain kind of gypsy music, and it has all of that. But it also has a kind of absurd Dr. Strangelove quality where the amateurism goes up and up and up. And when you get to the top, people are utterly amateur and hopeless. But within your closed central scene, there's that thing that I think is so extraordinary from those films, because we're looking inside a civil war, and it's as though there are 2 drunk people in a bar, except that they have guns. And that's the only thing that, in a way, makes it a war. And I think the scene that we've chosen probably gives you a really good kick at that atmosphere. Can I introduce it like that?
Yes.
Okay, so could we have the clip? Now, we may turn our backs to you. It's because the clips are a bit long and we need to see one another's films. So we may sort of turn our chairs or go and stand in the wings, but don't be disturbed by that. Could we have the clip, please, from No Man's Land? Thank you. Thank you. We're going to get a chance to go back to Danis in a minute, and I'm just going to work my way through the 3 clips. Samuel Maoz, I've said something about his life and his relationship to the material of the film, which is pretty extraordinary. But I would like you to say a bit more about how there was a moment where you thought this film was possible to make. In which, in a way, the leading character is part of your own lived experience, and at the moment, there was a moment when you thought about making it earlier, and how that was impossible.
I'll start and say that as Lebanon is my true personal story, so from my point of view, the making of Lebanon was a need. Okay, so of course, generally it was, a need to unload, a need to expose the war as is, without all the heroic stuff and the rest of the cliches. But it was mainly a need to, I don't know if to say forgive myself is the right expression, but as I have responsibility, so maybe to find some understanding to the no way out chaotic situation I went through. And yet it took, yes, it took me 25 years to deal with my demons and to tell my story. The first time that I tried to write it was on 88, immediately after I finished to learn cinema in the university. And it was weird because the first memory was the smell of burning flesh. And so I back off. I did it, of course, in a way because I was afraid, but mainly because in that time I saw that I don't want to make this film just as someone who was there, but more as a film director that will be able to take those memories, to take this pain and process it from time to time in a cold way, in a cruel way, to a film that will work, that will do the work. So it's a long story, but I guess that in the end, my trigger was the second Lebanon war in 2006. Suddenly I saw that I didn't spoke for 25 years, and now our kids are dealing with the same Lebanon again. And when it's regarding you, so you can skip it, but when it's touching your children, this is start to be something else. By the way, I'm lucky to have daughter. We used to say in Israel, you're lucky to have daughters. But a good friend of mine lost his son. So in the end, I told myself that I must do it. And even if it's going to be a suicide project, I'm going to go with the smell, with everything. And I was surprised, by the way, because when I started to write, it suddenly no smell anymore. I even tried to bring it back to my memory, but and I felt a kind of liberation. And in that time came the film director and took control on the cinematic process. And
it must have been an extraordinary experience for those actors to deal with a director like you with that relationship to the material.
Sorry?
It must have been an extraordinary experience for the actors to deal with a relationship to the material from a director like you in that moment.
I guess, but in the end, I waited 25 years because I wanted to do it, as I told you before, more as a writer and the film there. And so when I felt, let's say, pain of my main actor, so it was more a pain of a screenwriter that feel pain on his characters than me feeling pain on myself. So I can say that Lebanon is a film which deals with horrible dilemmas, with the state of surviving in front of your own death, a situation in which the conflict between your most basic instinct, your surviving instinct to your humanity, can tear your soul apart. Regarding to the clip itself, I'll say that the war in Lebanon came from a personal point of view. I mean, the film is almost, all the film is inside a tank. The entire film is inside a tank. And we see the war outside just through the gunner viewfinder behind this cross. It's not a general war. It's a very limited war because as a soldier, you can't see the whole picture, and it's also not good for the war interest that you will see the whole picture. You stay stuck with your small private piece of war.
And technically, it's an extraordinary achievement because you make a film, a feature film, where we're almost all the time inside that tank, and you made the actors spend time so they could feel the claustrophobia of that space in preparation. Is that right?
You want to talk about how I prepare the actors? Yeah, it's quite interesting. I mean, Lebanon is in a way experiential film, so as such it has less than 30% dialogues. I mean, most of the film is without a single word. So what I did, I didn't do a traditional rehearsals on the scene themselves because many of the scenes were without text. What I did is to put my actors in a kind of war state of mind. For example, the first step was to explain them the meaning of being inside a tank. So instead of explaining them the claustrophobic experience, the darkness and the heavy heat, I locked each one of them in a small, dark, and very, very hot container for a few hours. By the way, I did it on myself. And the first 15 minutes are extremely difficult. It's a shock of heat and darkness, and you feel that you almost can't breathe. But after a while, you get used to it. And after 1 hour, you are floating like you are under a kind of light hypnosis. In that time, we knocked on the container wall with iron pipes. It's really a terrifying moment. It's to jump from 0 to 100, and in a way, it's very similar to a sudden attack on the tank. Then came another 3 hours with total other state of mind. You can't flow anymore. You are waiting for the next time. There won't be a next time, but the waiting itself, the tense, the fear from the unexpected, the unknown, the anxiety, this is the war routine. So after 4 hours, when I opened the container wall, I found inside, I signed a wet actor, with a bit of madness expression in his red eyes, and I knew he understood. But of course, it's not even close to the war itself because he knew he was safe, but he felt the principle of it. That's more or less the way.
Thank you. So we're going to get back to it now, just to contextualize the clip. Yeah.
Regarding to the clip, I choose this clip because this is the first war sequence in Lebanon. And I think that the clip reflects, almost in a mathematical way, the basic dilemmas and conflict that a young soldier, suddenly finds himself in war situation.
Okay, so it's a 5 or 6 minute clip. We're going to run it through, and it's a very complex thing. So we're going to run the whole of that scene. Can we have the clip from Lebanon, please? Thank you. Thank you. And again, I want to get back to talking about that scene in the whole movie. Just to move on to Janus, you had extraordinary access and an extraordinary courageous director and crew to make a documentary which often feels as though we're watching a fiction. And it's partly because of the way the story develops and the scoring and the cutting, but it's also because you seem to be in every place that you need to be at every time in the film, and I found that very extraordinary. In fact, if somebody wasn't told that it was a documentary, I don't know if you had this experience, for the first 20 minutes, they think, well, okay, these are actors. That happens to you?
Yeah, that's happened on a few occasions, that people have come after the film and wasn't, you know, I've had questions in Q&As about whether the film, if it was dangerous for the actors to be in Afghanistan.
Yeah, and in a way, it's because also as it develops, you have an understanding that it's a documentary, but at the very beginning, there's a sense of a portrait, of a kind of portraiture. So you started as a documentary filmmaker making films in Denmark about sort of issues in social life in Denmark. What was your contact with the idea of the unit that was going to Helmand in Afghanistan, and where did it begin as an idea?
Well, I'd worked on 2 documentaries on migration, marriage migration to be more specifically, about Thai women and Danish men. And the whole sort of perspective on those films was to talk about globalization, but through a grain of sand, on the intimate stage of, you know, third world woman meets first world man, in a sense, and the types of transactions and expectations that's set in that meeting. And having finished that, I was, you know, looking for a new story, and I found myself kind of gobsmacked with the fact that Denmark was a nation at war and no one was really relating to it. There'd been no thorough documentary done on the Danish soldiers, and then an opportunity came up that there was actually a production company that was working on something along the same lines, and we teamed up and started developing Armadillo. I mean, the film was really, from the outset, you know, a rock and roll type of project. We had very little funding. It was originally meant to be half-an-hour TV version for a Danish broadcaster, and it ended up as a full feature, winning a prize in Cannes through various runs of financing and kicking doors in all over the place. But I mean, ultimately, my interest came from wanting to challenge and question Danish national self-understanding through looking at how the bombs we drop abroad fall on ourselves, in a sense. And in that, for me, there was, you know, I was curious about this sort of philosophical, psychological inquiry that's general to every war, I think, which is the very thin dividing lines between, you know, our understanding of the civilized and then this sort of barbaric lure that is always there, and that traumatizes soldiers, and that also works as seduction to particularly young people. So for me, it was also a way of working with a generation of young people who found the idea of going to Afghanistan as something of an adventure, of something of a journey of becoming, and this whole sort of group mentality that's formed within the army based on these notions of heroism and masculinity. for me that was a fundamentally interesting question, to look at how these things are unfolded from an eye level perspective, and to see, to talk about this brutalization of the mind that war ultimately is, and how that imposes a new idea of who we are as Danes.
There are moments of great excitement amongst them, and you feel a kind of surge of this testosterone that they're becoming an army unit, and it's very frightening. You're right. Did you have an idea of a story you expected? Because extraordinary amount happens. How long were you attached to that unit to make the film?
Well, I was in Afghanistan with the soldiers for 3.5 months altogether. For most of that time, I had my cinematographer with me, so that was a very small crew, just me and him, and we were, working embedded with the soldiers. They're deployed for 6 months period, and then we did. As I've done with my previous films, a very extensive research before beginning to shoot. So, with the films I've done, I've worked from a philosophy of documentary filmmaking that you can actually plan a documentary to a very large extent ahead. Not to say that you will be able to know what is going to happen, but you will be able to research your story well enough and research with your characters well enough to know what kinds of scenes are relevant to your film. And in that type of preparation, obviously I conduct a lot of interviews with soldiers. I spend a lot of time with them. I go camping out in the woods, prepare the shoot, talk with soldiers that have come back from Afghanistan, and I even work with script writers to sensitize myself to the kind of story that I feel is at the core of what I'm trying to do.
But you got extraordinary access to those soldiers and to their families. When they said to you, "What's your film about?" Did you have an answer, or did you?
I said to them, which I think is still what the film is about. It's about what war does to young soldiers going to war, and trying to look at the situation in Afghanistan also from a sort of bottom-up perspective, rather than talking about strategies and politics and taking a more journalistic approach. Then it's an experience-based documentary, and I'm telling it from your perspective. And I also said to them, well, ultimately I think it's also a film about fear, and it's a film about what happens when you're facing death. What are the psychological mechanisms of war? And even though I'm very critical to military, and I made a lot of enemies in the Danish army after this film, there's one thing that I do like about soldiers is that they're often quite straightforward to talk to, and this was a very big help in doing the film. Also, even in coming out with the film, because even though we were challenged in a lot of ways, and they tried to confiscate our material, and in other ways influence the film to make it a more one-sided heroic image of their efforts in Afghanistan, which is what to me, Armadillo ultimately challenges is the image of the hero, the soldier hero, or the soldier as a hero, and that's quite a difficult thing to challenge, particularly in documentary, because you can't stage things like Samuel and Danis have done so brilliantly. So that when you're working from an embedded perspective, you really have to think about what is it that the soldiers tell themselves, what is it they can't see. How does camp mentality also become, this solid structure in the head that bars their experiences and their perspectives and gives them a certain bias in terms of how they carry out their work. We saw one film that's filmed from an extreme POV perspective that talks about some of the same things. But this was one of the fundamental challenges of doing Armadillo.
It's interesting to me because also it's a film where you find a way, observationally, of critiquing this professionalist culture of the military. I mean, these two other films that we're talking about this afternoon are films really about conscripted armies and peasant armies, and so they're full of confusion for that reason. There isn't that idea. Well, there is an idea of professionalism which is rhetorical, but it's not practiced. And there's an extraordinary sense to introduce the clip that we're showing that after the events that are in the clip, there's a tremendous sense of they have a debriefing, and there's a lot of pride in how everyone conducted things, and there's a sense that being in the army is a professional job. Did you feel as a filmmaker that the people you were filming were trying to make sure they were giving you that impression? I mean, so you were kept away from things which were dysfunctional.
Yeah, I think of course. I mean, it took a great big effort for me to convince the officers that I had to come out on the first patrol, for instance, because they were saying, well, we have to get adjusted to things, we don't know exactly what we are going to meet, and it's not going to be safe for you either. And I had to say, well, if I need to make a truthful film about what it means to get deployed as a soldier to Afghanistan and to make a film that's truthful to you, I have to be able to have those types of experiences on camera. And somehow I managed to convince them about that. But every time something didn't make sense in their own sort of idea of how they wanted them to how they wanted to represent themselves, that's when I had that's when I had a difficult time filming, and that's particularly when they had wounded on their own side. And when, some of the most difficult things for me were to film soldiers calling their mothers or their girlfriends, being emotional and not, it was much easier for me to film them watching pornography or killing people than to film them calling their mother, as long as it was done within the right frame of being a soldier. And for a long time I was quite frustrated by the fact that no one was, really showing any emotion inside the camp. As a filmmaker, and particularly as a documentary filmmaker, you thrive on people's emotions. That's what gives you your story. It gives you your points of identification with other people. Until I realized, well, listen, the whole professionalized atmosphere and the kinds of taboo and the kinds of ritualization that surrounds death and surrounds war making is much more disturbing and much more frightening and is actually the counter image to this heroic idea of the soldier that's being ritualized through army processions, because that's the types of instrumentalization and dehumanization that takes place in any war that allows you to kill people. So that noticing that, sensitizing myself towards that, I think is actually what made the film.
Well, let's just quickly introduce the clip then. This is quite late in the film, and it's the major, sort of second major action in the film, and there's some confusion about where the enemy are, and this is where some Taliban fighters are actually in a trench right in front of them, but they don't know they're there. Shall I say any more?
No, I just wanted to say very briefly for those of you who haven't seen the film follows this platoon of soldiers through their 6 months deployment, and a big part of the film is that they never see the enemy. So there's almost this, progression of a hunt that goes on through the film, and then the setup for this scene is that they've planned an ambush. They found out where a meeting point for the Taliban, and they go out to ambush them.
Okay, can we run the clip, please? Thanks. Thank you. Well, I want to get the audience in a minute. First of all, I just want to ask a question and to go around you, the three of you, with the question about, it's controversial to make films about war, and all the questions that are asked about them treat you as a kind of representative of a position generally. And so you have to go through that experience. And I'm interested in about the notion of taking a side or being in the middle and how that functions from the point of view of the way you work as a filmmaker. Danis, you're in this unusual situation because you're able dramatically to show both sides of a conflict. And in fact, you have, in a way, the other, so you have, within the film, there's a kind of rather crazy version of, well, the real version of the rather crazy UN structure, and the BBC, and there's the kind of German who arrives just exactly at the moment that he said he was going to arrive. And in a way, though, the various players in the conflict are all played out. But did you get accused of taking sides in the argument, and how did you try to stand in the middle? Because you do more than most films that have been made about that war.
I really believe in taking sides. I know it's not very politically correct to say, but my film is actually, in a way, against United Nations because I don't believe in neutrality. It doesn't exist. God himself, if you believe in God, is objective. We are all subjective. We belong to, to certain society, to certain whatever side. And I'm Bosnian, and actually I was really proud of being Bosnian, and I was actually proud of making this movie, which was not anti-Serb film, but was actually anti-war film. But I didn't feel an urge to explain really what was happening in my country. I also think anybody who wanted to know what was happening, could have learned. So that was, I never had an issue with it. I think that as a filmmaker, for me, the ethics come first before any aesthetic. And I very often can't discuss some directors who used to work in ex-Yugoslavia who make work from position which I find, unacceptable. To put it,
yeah. So in some ways, you're answering that work. There's some of the work that's made from the partisan, from the Serbian side of the conflict.
Whatever side it is, but it's like at this moment you have a politician in Bosnia and Herzegovina who is, I don't know how much you follow the politics in my country. A guy says that genocide in Srebrenica never happened. So any filmmaker dealing with this guy, for me, is it's just not to consider. So I think it's very important to have, actually, to take sides.
Take a position.
It is. I don't believe in not taking positions. I believe in taking positions, saying why you're taking this position, saying it loudly, because I think this meat of neutrality is getting us very often to the situation in which is actually an excuse not to do anything. I don't see, when somebody's burning village, I don't see what's there about being neutral. If somebody's raping a woman, I don't see what neutrality means. Actually, my country suffered a lot. I tried to explain to United Nations people. They asked me, are we this bad? I said, no, you're worse. But if I made a true movie about you, nobody would believe me because everybody believes you're a nice bunch of guys. But if you remember conflict in Bosnia and Herzegovina was recognized as a country. Then it was you call it civil war, I call it war, whatever. It's a mixture of both. But then it was really attacked by Yugoslav army, which at that point became Serbian army. We were put an embargo weapon with no way of defending us. Basically, we had no arms. And then they started feeding us, telling us, we neutral, just do your thing, we're just going to feed you. And I said to a woman who asked me this question, it's as if a man next to you would rape you at this very moment. I come, I say, don't bother, I'm neutral, just continue doing these things. Then I tie your hands behind so you can't defend yourself, and I give you a piece of chocolate so you stand better while he's doing what he's doing. This is what you did in my country, in the name of neutrality. So I really don't believe in neutrality. I don't know what's there to be neutral about what happened in Srebrenica. I don't know what's there neutral to be, about the siege of Sarajevo, which was, impossible thing. I mean, at the end of the 20th century in Europe, you have a siege, besieged city for 4 years. So what's there to be neutral about? So I don't believe in neutrality.
Thank you. Okay, I'm coming to you next, Samuel, because your film, in a way, doesn't take sides at all. It represents the experience of the IDF in that conflict, and it doesn't talk about more than the individual terms of the conflict. Whenever you're in a situation where you're making a war which is about, in a sense, the people in uniform rather than the people outside the boxes, then that generates controversy, and you've had controversy about your film. What do you say when people say, oh, well, is this how you represent the other side in the conflict?
In my case, I think that political is a tricky term. I mean, my film is not political in the superficial sense, in a way that there are no good guys and bad guys, the war is the bad guy and everybody are its victims. And when I made Lebanon, I really didn't thought about being or not being political, but I really tried the best I could to create an effective film. A film that will, okay, I won't be naive to say stop the war, but at least make a step, change some people, opinions, priorities, perspective in my small bleeding country. And you can't simply do it just by telling people that they are the bad guys. I mean, it won't work. Usually you will achieve the opposite and people will extreme their positions. But if you attack them from another angle, if you attack them through the stomachs, through their hearts, if you arrange them a kind of an emotional manipulation, you'll probably reach them, at least part of them. The job of the tank driver in Lebanon was basically to break mothers' hearts. Because if you are a mother, an Israeli mother, and a global mother, you won't really care if the soldier is a Jew, Arab, wrong or right. But if the soldier is a child that can easily be your child, this is totally other state of mind. And when I did my first screening, it was a test screening, and I chose a place from the right side of the political map, because the others were basically my audience. So it was my first Q&A. A young woman with wet eyes started to talk in front of her all very conservative community and said that after seeing this film, she can't avoid from thinking about her sister Big Boy who should go to the army next year, about her two little boys. And she said that the film in many ways changed her perspective and her priorities. And then, like 1 hour, they started to talk between them about issues that till that moment were a kind of taboo. I mean, you are not talking about the subjects that make you community. So, in my case, I can say that I prefer to change one mother priorities, to save one soldier life, than, let's say, to please 100 journalists that's sitting in Europe and expect me to say the right politically correct slogans.
Okay, thank you. But I just want to ask you a supplementary question. I mean, clearly and rightly, you've said that you've got an Israeli audience, and the Israeli audience's position needs to be analyzed before it can be shifted into any place, and you've got a very clear idea of that audience. Having won a prize in Venice, having an audience around the world, does that change your view of your own film? And
Sorry again?
Does the film going out into the world to audiences away from Israel give you a different sense of its power? How do you think it? I mean, 100 journalists is one thing, but there are much bigger audiences than that outside of Israel looking at the film.
The truth is that when I made Lebanon, I didn't thought about the audience. I didn't thought about Venice. I thought about, as someone who was there and was, I feel responsibility. I feel, in a way, guilty. So, okay, it was a no way out situation, but there is a huge difference between understanding that you didn't have a choice to the fact that you feel guilty and responsible. But I must say that after Venice, I was with my film almost all over the world, and I met people that were in Vietnam, in Afghanistan, in Bosnia, and I met people from Lebanon, and many of them, you know, hugged me in the end because I think that the film telling something that people can't tell, people that was there. And as I told you before, for me, I have a goal. I wanted to do an effective film that will save life here and there. And that's why I choose to do an experiential film. That's why I used that's why I did, you can say, many emotional or even pornographic manipulations. But for me, everything is I mean, everything is okay to bring peace, except killing, of course. So.
It's interesting, though, in terms of what films are and what they do, because in a way you've got the opposite position from Danis, because his film is helping to establish something which in journalism has had an impact, which is that essentially the Bosnian Serbs were militarized and they were the bad guys, and we established that they were the bad guys in a way.
Because I feel that in the deeper meaning, where politics is a kind of, let's say, ethical term that wish to prove the human race. So my film is definitely political, yes. But it's not politically correct. Yeah. It's okay. Without the slogans.
All right, thank you very much. Now, Janus Metz, I just want to ask you, obviously in the making of your film, you're attached to a unit, you've got your job, which is to reflect the thoughts of those people who were there and their sense of purpose. Did you have either limitations that you put on yourself or limitations that were put from outside on discussing the value and the purpose of the conflict that they were fighting, what they thought about their role in fighting a war in Afghanistan? Was that something that you deliberately didn't want to cover, or that was just out of bounds?
Well, I thought, you know, for me to try and come to any real conclusion about whether we should be in Afghanistan, whether we shouldn't be in Afghanistan, you know, the whole history of the place seemed somewhat futile, because it's Afghanistan is an extremely complex situation, and I thought actually the types of questions that are underlying, you know, these what I tend to call political or journalistic types of questions were much more interesting from a filmmaking perspective and from a perspective of humanity, I'd say. I think what I was trying to get to was, you know, talking about the nature of war in a universal sense, not just in a concrete sense of how the situation looks in Afghanistan, but talking about the people that are in that place, and something that tends to be forgotten in politics, of how individual people's actions and the way that war affects individuals actually triggers up through the system. And I relate to what Samuel and Danis is saying in terms of, you know, the ethical concept of it. Because even if Armadillo is not made from a particular political side of the spectre, some would argue that it was. Some would try to spin it politically to their advantage, whether it be right-wing or left-winged. But it's certainly made from an ethical perspective.
Yeah. They'll switch you on when they see you talking.
All right. It's, from my point of view, it's almost impossible to do a pure anti-war humanistic film that will be also political. It's not going on together, Because if it's political, so you have bad guys and good guys, and it's not pure humanistic anymore. And I try to be beyond those issues, to talk about the war itself.
I'd like to add that in terms of also looking at Afghanistan, you're really posing a great risk to your filmmaking or I would have done that if I would have, for instance, overtaken the pro-war rhetorics, even in a sense of saying Armadillo is the front line. We're there to protect the city at the back. Then all of a sudden the killings make sense. Yes, of course we have to protect the city for the Taliban to infiltrate the city, while knowing that this is also just another way of trying to rationalize strategies of being there, strategies of the politics of war. And I very deliberately try to circumvent those kinds of things, which obviously gives the film some weaknesses in some points, but it gives it a real strong point of departure from an ethical perspective, I think.
So one of the things that interests me about all these three films is that there's a sort of tradition of the sort of Oscar season, and not the foreign language Oscar, but the main Oscar, kind of flabby, liberal, important movie that makes you feel outraged within liberal politics. I remember that when David Putnam was preparing the Cambodia film, The Killing Fields, and I was a film distributor, and I had things like the Battle of Algiers and Zed and Costa Gavras films, and I would send them over once a week because they were desperately watching those movies to think about what they were doing. And I remember having a conversation with him later saying, well, look, if you want to make a liberal outrage movie with an American and a friend and all of those things, it actually has nothing whatever to do with what either Costa Gavras or Pontecorvo are trying to do, because they're trying to make something which is about strategy, where it enables you to think about what's actually happening inside the thing politically, rather than showing you some blood and then saying, oh my God, there's blood, we must do something, I must subscribe to a charity or whatever the thing is. And I'm wondering, because you're making a documentary, whether there's a sense in your mind that's a much cleaner and clearer way of contributing to an understanding than trying to fictionalize what goes on in war.
No, I don't think so. I don't think that documentary that neither documentary or fiction holds the higher ground over another. It's all about the individual film. I mean, when I see the two previous clips from Armadillo, I mean, they're certainly just as powerful, and you can get you get close to some other types of stories. With Armadillo, you are in some ways, with the documentary, you are in a lot of ways limited to reality. I mean, I'm seeing the clip that we showed from Armadillo. I want to say that most of that particular clip was filmed from a helm camera perspective, why it's so shaky. And obviously the type of way you can dwell on atmospheres and emotion and psychological developments, as in the other two films, are more difficult in that sense. So I think, from a political perspective, Armadillo had a lot of strength because it had reality with it. There was no one who could say, well, this is just a fiction of the filmmaker's mind. It's got nothing to do with the real situation in Afghanistan, because you can't run away from the shots. That's what it was like. So in that way, it did have a very strong point of attack for a Danish debate, and there was a very huge debate about this film. I think it was successful in changing public opinion on the war in Afghanistan, or at least making a more nuanced debate. But I thoroughly believe that one shouldn't make too clear dividing lines between documentary and fiction, really.
Thank you. I just want to ask about independent, small, low-budget movies, because it seems like these films are able to exist and to toe an individual line and to be powerful and individual, partly because they're below the parapet of what a more mainstream producer might imagine is a war picture. And I just want to talk to you about the organizing method, because in each case there's a sense of inspiration about how we can make a film about something so huge in a small way. But you were always going to make a film in a tank, and you don't really have the exterior of a tank, so you achieve an extraordinary amount of, what we'd think of as here's a war movie by this choice of point of view, by just seeing the inside.
Yes, I mean, the first step was that I wrote a basic, simple plot. The plot for me was the background. Even the events that really happened were for me the symptoms, not the issue itself. The issue was the bleeding soul. The story was what's going on inside the soldier's soul when he needs to deal with such an extreme dilemmas and horrible, unlogical, impossible conflicts. And the best way to read the soul is through the eyes. Everybody will tell you that war is one of the most expensive genres because you need airplanes, tanks, lots of extras, non-stop special effects. But for me, war is more like a fascinating psychological case, an opportunity to taste to explore the human nature in its basic manner, to test it through one of the most basic conflict, the conflict between our surviving instinct to our humanity. And you don't necessarily need the long shot to deal with those issues. The close-up is better in that case. I mean, one of the main jobs of the long shot is to locate the audience, to put some order in the frame. War, on the other hand, is a chaotic scenario, and many great dramatic motifs like tense, fear, madness came out of this chaos. So I think that, as I see it, if you'll save some long shots from your audience, if you'll arrange a kind of controlled chaos in your structure, so you'll probably earn more involvement, identification, and as a byproduct, you will save some heavy money as well.
And Danis, because you've talked already about how you chose something that was almost like a theatrical situation. We saw most of your production values in the clip, which is the artillery bombardment, in a way. I'm interested because I was a producer of a film about the Bosnian War, which is almost entirely set in London, and people meet on London buses and shout about burning villages on London buses. So in a way, exactly Samuel says, although those issues can be moved anywhere. But while you were preparing that film, did you get in conversations with people about, let's broaden it out, let's make more of a movie about the conflict itself? Well, that never came up. You were always going to make it in that controlled way.
Yes.
Sorry, it wasn't really a question.
I love these long questions where the answer is simple. Actually, what funny thing is you're talking about is production value. My producers made me. I cut No Man's Land in a very short time. I cut it in 1 week. I finished the editing of the film, and then producers came and says, the only thing we really paid for is these cars showing off, and you cut this out. Yeah, and I said, because it's raining, and they called the DP and said, it's okay, you can put it out, I'll make it work. So that was about the explosion, about talking about production value. The guy who came, actually, it was one of the most shocking experiences of my life, because they showed me this expert from Belgium who's going to make explosions, and I just came out of war. So he makes the first explosion, which was a white smoke coming out of the grass, and I was like, what went wrong? And he said, what do you mean? I said, where's the explosion? I said, that was it. I said, well, this is not Charlie Chaplin film, for fuck's sake, I need something. And then actually we went on the internet, and thank God that the guy who did Steven Spielberg film wrote about how he shot these, shots of one of the most incredible war scenes, which is in Saving Private Ryan. And then I actually realized that he was making this mixture of water and mud So I basically spent the evening trying to make this, work, and then this guy at the end, who was paid basically for doing this, told me, I learned so much, thank you very much. And I was like, wow, I really do. And it's, it's when you're making movies like this, you always have to find ways of trying to make things work. I remember I had one jacket that I wanted to explode, and then I did, and it was not good. I said, bring me another, and so that was the only one. And then we had to kind of clean it and, sew it, and then I did it again. So, and for example, the tank never shut. You have this picture, you have something at least more. I didn't even have tank shooting because they said you can't shoot here because whatever.
He has a tank in a field of sunflowers. It doesn't actually move, really, doesn't it? So finally, I want to get to the audience, but Janus, did anyone, when you came back and the material was interesting and it was no longer a half hour or no longer 20 minutes, did they say, oh, don't be you, just you and your DP, and would you like this very nice camera, and can't we send a professional sound recordist? And did you have to maintain a level of quite simple resources in terms of what you applied to making that film? Maybe they didn't throw money at you.
No, but I mean, one of the blessings of making a documentary often is that you don't need all these things because there is a real tank there firing, so you just need the DP to film it. So we didn't have these types of problems, and I think when we came back from our first trip to Afghanistan, it was very clear to people at the Danish Film Institute and broadcasters and the funding bodies that were on board from the beginning that we had something that had never been seen before. We had an access and a presence with the soldiers that had never been seen before. So we spent the whole of our production budget, or our shooting budget, on the first 3 weeks, and then we went back and asked for more money. And luckily people were sensible enough to give it to us.
Good.
I like to add and say that one great cinematic way to save money in a war film is to use the soundtrack. Once I had an interview with a journalist who started to talk with me about the helicopter scene. So I told him, it's nice that you call it the helicopter scene because there is no helicopter in this scene, just wind, dust, dirt, shakes, and extremely heavy noise of heavy helicopter noise. He started to argue with me. He was sure that he saw an helicopter in this scene. So, but
I had a helicopter in my film, but he had a tank shooting. Maybe next time we should.
But I guess maybe this is one of the cinema magics, because sometimes something that you can't see just here became much bigger than any reality. By the way, another small but very efficient trick to cover your poor war sets, is a heavy black smoke moving on the foreground. As I didn't have enough money for some decent fine war sets, I used to use it all the time, and believe me, it costs nothing and it makes the change big time. I mean, it hiding your poverty, it hiding your flops. It creates a sense of tense and action. It makes it real, and like in the sound psychological effect, when you can't see it clearly, it became bigger than itself.
And the good thing about low-budget war movies is they're in hospitals all the time, so you see wounds, like MASH or whatever.
Yeah, but I must say that I think that the first step is to find your point of view and position your limits. It's not just regarding to war. I think it's something basic. Maybe this is what makes the difference between cinema to other video medias. I mean, I think that as much as your limits are clear and sharp, as much as your angle is narrow, you as a writer, director, producer, whatever, will be much more in focus. And when everybody are tuned, so the money goes precisely for the needs of your frame.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Can we have some questions from the floor? There's one there. Shall I give you my mic? Is there a mic? Oh, there's a mic coming to you here. Down in the second row.
I have a question for the director of Lebanon. On what basis did you choose your actors, and how did you communicate with them to get these emotional performances?
As I told here earlier, I prepared them because.
I don't mean. Sorry, I didn't mean the story you told earlier, but I mean, for the scene by scene, the practical, like the scene that we just saw. I mean, I'm sure you can't put him in a hot tank and then take him out and then he will do what you just tell him, because it was so specific. It was such a specific emotion.
Yeah. Well, this is about your directing technique, really, isn't it? It's about
No.
How much of a conversation do you have with the actors just before you turn over in a scene?
And what do you tell them?
And what do you tell them? Okay, there you are.
I really believe that I mean, that's the way I see it, that if you want to create a strong emotional effect, if you want that your audience will feel even a bit from what's going on inside your character's souls, so the actor himself must really feel it or feel something. I mean, words are weak in such an extreme situation. I mean, you need to trust the eyes, the body language. So I really prepared them. It was 3 months of preparation, more or less like I talked before, many other sessions. Many others ideas.
Other kinds of torture on extreme situations.
I think that if I will talk about it here, so I couldn't go back to my countries. I mean, yeah, but they were totally ready when they are in the set. They were totally ready, and on the set itself, because I had many scenes without text, so I pushed them till the limit, and then I shoot. Buy the DVD, see the making of, and you will know.
See the making of. Good, thank you. Other questions? There's one there.
Hello. I think this question would be concerning all 3 of you. We were talking earlier about taking a stance in a war film. Do you think it's right for a director to portray his own personal political stance in a film? Or is it wrong to somehow create a different, like his own personal perspective in it? Or should he just remain neutral throughout the film?
Well, I sort of feel that Danis has answered that pretty well just now, but would you want to say a bit more about why you can't, a director...
I mean, in a really political sense, because like Pontecorvo's film, Battle of Algiers was criticized for being leftist. Do you think, is it the right thing to do for a director?
I think the difficulty is we're going to end up having a conversation about whether, about our understanding of culture and whether it's possible to have objectivity and whether any such thing exists in the real world or whether it's an idea which is put upon us by people who are authoritarians and whether really we're all subjective and then we need to account for our subjectivity. But, that's a kind of an academic space which, in a way, is difficult to go into because it's a big one. But I think, in a way, your question is sort of being covered by, do you want to take a stand? I think what you're saying is it's possible, in your view, not to be a leftist or a rightist, and does the panel agree? Is that your question? You're saying Giulio Pontecorvo could have made a film where the French authorities and the Algerian revolutionaries could have had an equal representation.
I'm just wondering, is it okay for a director to say, this is my stance, this is what I believe in, and that's how,
this is basically why you should make a movie, is because you have a belief in something. If you don't make the film. What's the point?
Yeah.
Very good. Now, do either of you want to say anything else? I think that's the key. I'm sorry, but that's the key. For me, that's the key of any art, is that you're trying to communicate something, what you believe in, what you think is right or no right or whatever. But that's what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in seeing whatever newsreel. I want to see what to show me subject and then to tell me, in a way what you think. All this question of subjectivity, objectivity is just nonsense to me. I think even the news are subjective. I mean, if you've been watching what's been happening in Egypt lately, if you watched Egypt state media, there was nothing happening, or it was really bad. And if you watched, everybody else's, then it was completely opposite. So, being even journalist, I think you can't avoid. Even the critic about the films. I don't read critics anymore because you know what? Some people love your film, some don't. If I had the bad sex last night, maybe I'm going to have really, bad opinion about the film I've seen, or maybe, just because I won the lottery, I'm going to love the whole world, and even the worst film I've seen is going to be, and then, I've seen some films that I loved 10 years ago. I look at them now and I go like, what the hell happened to you? And now, or the opposite. So, so go ahead, be yourself. This is what this is all about, and more you're yourself, better it's going to be. And don't worry about being original or copy. You are what you are. Even if you try to copy me, you can't. You're you doing me, but it's still you. So,
very good. Even though it's not really my role, because I'm supposed to moderate here, I just want to add one thing, which is that there used to be a thing called counter-information that was very valuable when you were in a political situation and there were different interpretations. And what you did was you looked at the information you were given, and then you decided for what reason the people who gave you the information would want you to believe that thing. And that's the basis of libertarian anti-journalism from the 60s onwards, and of course it existed before with another name. But counter-information is a very useful way of thinking about the world because it's very significant that these films weren't made by American producers on very high budgets, where there were lots of people whose political positions needed to be supported or dealt with, and so they to some degree fall below that radar, where you can do that. Who is next? You tell me.
Me. I'm next.
Okay, you're next. Somebody's
no,
got the
sorry,
microphone.
I've got the phone.
Yes.
Yeah.
At the back, and then we'll go to over here.
Thank you. I've been waiting a moment. My question is, at the two directors, when you're doing a war film, from your own experiences, how do you deal with actors or staff having been not professionally involved, personally involved in the same war dealing? So does it happen? Do you have scenes of re-traumatization on the set, and how do you deal with that? Do you plan ahead? Or do you just deal with it as it comes along, if it comes along at all?
Just to interpret your question, are you saying when you're dealing with actors and technicians who haven't been in war situations?
Who have been just in the same war in these situations?
Oh, who have been,
yes.
Yes. How do you deal with the fact that it just throws up so much emotion to reenact things that they've actually taken part in?
Do you, as a director, plan ahead?
Yeah.
Or
I mean, they are actors. In that case, Anthony Hopkins should kill people and eat them before he made. I mean, I don't understand the question exactly. Sorry.
The question is,
but
you're
it's
there.
my problem. It's my English.
Remember that your director of photography was a helicopter pilot or whatever on your film. So somebody else who's fought in the same conflict, and they go into making. This is as far as I understand the question. When they go into making a film about that conflict, how do you deal with their feelings about going back to their own experience? I think that's the question. Is that not the question? It is.
He can't answer. I'll tell you.
Answer it. So I'm going to go over to
No,
Danis.
I had the gun when I was shooting No Man's Land, so I would just say act, and they did it. Seriously, they're actors. They are like I don't know. I don't know if there is any special preparation to any kind of, I just think the key is to choose the real good actors, to talk with them before you shoot about the scene, about what do you want from this scene, and then I don't think there is only one way of getting there. I think I've seen many film directors working in a completely different way. For me, the way I work in this kind of scenes is, because I did call this very often the scenes that you talk about actors scene, because very often I need they're not like just shooting or coming or out of door, whatever. What I do as a director, I let them I let them be. I don't tell them anything. I just put them into place and I just let them be. Because if I do before what I feel and how I should do this thing, they're gonna go for it. So for me, is choosing an actor actually is, an act of taking somebody who knows how to act, who's gonna think about it, who's gonna read the screenplay, come to the set, and then I let them be. And then I see what they do. And very often, they do something completely different from what I've imagined. And if it works with what I've imagined, then I mix it with mine. Or if their solution is much better than mine, I just take it. Or if I dislike completely what they're doing, I just tell them, I would like you to do this and this and this. But, I'm sure that, Mike Lee would kill me right now for saying that.
We've just got him just behind the curtains. He's going to come. No,
thank you.
In fact,
because he would do it in a
curtain-
completely different way, and he would prepare it eternally, for the actors, and that works for him. Or, Claude Lelouch would tell me, like, why do you need a screenplay? Just go and improvise. That's complete, and it's okay too. So I don't think there is. It's like.
But there are many ways, but I think that the first trick is to work with good actors.
Yeah. Now, on that very sound advice, I have to say there's somebody in the wings who's pointing at their watch in my direction, so we're going to have to stop very soon because we're 15 minutes over. If somebody's got a very brief, short question, who's next?
It's my turn.
Okay, so I'm going to have to let that one go. Can we have that question?
Okay. My question is to all three. I'm very curious to know what you will make next. As directors who made films so directly about war, will you be able to move to other topics, or will you continue making films about war?
That's a very good question for us to end on. I mean, I also would like to add the question of having, when you've just had a major success and you get stuck in a hole, that's what you do. Then what is it like to get to the next thing? Because I know that at least one of you is in the middle of working on getting to the next film. So we start here with Samuel. What are you doing next?
I'm working on two tracks now. I didn't take a final decision. I'm writing two projects. One is not regarding directly to war itself, but more about the after effects. And the other is totally something else. It's a black comedy, which I feel a bit more desire to do it. Yeah, because you need to be ready. I mean, in the mental way to make a war film. And after Lebanon experience, I feel that I want to play with cinema a bit before maybe the next project.
Yeah.
The next deeper project. So, but I'm still. It's better than a white page, I guess. It's better than
it's
nothing.
better than a white page. A white page?
White page. No. But I after Armadillo, I took a very deliberate decision not to work until after New Year's, and I've just spent a month in Nigeria. So, literally, as of last week, I started working again. And I always have to kind of test myself in various directions and grapple with things before something is materialized. It's the same way if I shop for a pair of trousers, I always end up coming out with a jersey or a shirt. But I can say safely that I doubt very much that my next project is going to be about war, because I exhaust myself about a subject matter, and then I want to move on to something else. However, the core ingredients of the films I make tend to be similar. Even if the last two films I made were actually about love, and Armadillo is obviously about the brutality and archaic sort of barbarism of war, then there's a lot of similarities in those films anyhow.
Thank you very much. Danis?
I have 16 projects at this very moment. You can laugh, but that's the only way to survive in these days. I have a film in Bosnia, film in Sweden, film in India, film in States, another film in Bosnia, talking about one film in Germany. So it's like, they're all different states. I think today it's kind of, the situation is moving slowly with finances, with all the problems we have in cinema. I think actually at this very moment we are living what music industry lived 10 years ago with MP3. Suddenly, I can see my movies on the online before it hits the cinema, and it's hitting hard to the producers, especially the independent producers, especially the kind of movies we are making. So each time somebody torrents the film, a cinema dies, and it's really hard these days to make movies the way we do them. So I really have few projects going on. I have few screenplays, and first to come, first to serve. That's the logic.
So that's the moral: first come, first served, and have lots of projects.
It is, otherwise, when for a few years in my life, I had only one project, and it took me 3 years, and then, the first one, the actress got pregnant after 2 years, and I was really devastated at that point, so.
Well, there you are. That's very good advice. Now, we really have outlived our time, so I'm very sorry for those people who've got questions, and I'm sorry I don't look up enough and somebody waited for ages, and I apologize to them. And I want, on your behalf, to thank this extraordinary group, because it's amazing to get them all in one group. I'm sure you'll agree with me. So, Danis Tanovic, Janus Metz, and Samuel Maoz, thank you very much for talking to us.